Joining me live now from Warwick in Queensland is the Deputy Nationals Leader, Minister for Agriculture and Northern Australia, David Littleproud. David Littleproud, thanks very much for your time. What did you make of Josh Frydenberg's address? Do you agree with him in terms of those risks to capital and borrowing costs if we don't meet international expectations?
Well, he is right, and so too is Nancy Pelosi. Australia has a proud record of not only meeting Kyoto, but also in meeting Paris. We'll beat it. I mean, when Australia makes an international commitment, we make it with our eyes wide open and we look people in the eyes and tell you how we're going to do it. So I think the facts remain is that Australia has a proud record of international commitment and achievement, one in which I think we as a nation should reflect on a little bit more rather than the self-loathing that goes on, be proud of what we've achieved and the pathway that we're going to set ourselves. The Prime Minister's made it clear, as has the Treasurer, that his preference is to get to net zero by 2050 here in Australia, and he wants to do that through technology. Now, we want to look the Australian people square in the eyes and tell them how we're going to do that, and I think that's the honest broker way that Australia operates in. And I think we can do that not only nationally but internationally. We've got a strong track record, and that's why the Quad communique that came out overnight clearly states that the preference is to get to net zero by 2050, take into account the individual nation's own circumstances, and I think we're all going to get there in a different way, but with partnerships. And I think some of those partnerships you even touched on earlier around technology, and we've got an opportunity with carbon capture storage to partner with the United States. The Biden administration's very strong on that, and I think there's opportunities there where we've got to get back to first principles, which is reducing emissions. How we do that is really about technology. We shouldn't be cutting out one energy source or another until we've looked at the technology. And that's what we're doing as a government, doing it calmly and then looking the Australian people square in the eyes and telling them how we're going to do it.
You've always been open to this, though, climate action, with the caveat that if the ag sector, if farmers and the bush don't have to foot the bill and do the heavy lifting, as you've said to me previously, they did during the first phase, the Kyoto period of emissions reductions. But that's not a universal view. I mean, Barnaby Joyce has only come to this view recently. Why has he had this change of heart? He seems more open to the net zero target now.
Well, we all have a journey in which we make our mind up as the information becomes more and more prevalent to us. And so the reality is as we get more and more information, and at some juncture in the very near future, that technology roadmap will be presented to all the members of the National Party, and we'll be able to make that determination. We are the last line of defence for those people living in regional rural Australia, to protect them. They did pay the bill last time, and it's time to square the ledger to make sure that they're not burdened with the social licence of this country to continue to operate in a national framework. So we've done a lot of the heavy lifting, and I think if we look at technology,
it sounds like a deal is close, though. It's fair to say it sounds like a deal is close. I mean, the PM, as you know, you can see from our reports out of the United States, he's under pressure from Biden, from Johnson. He needs a deal. He's got to get the Nats over the line. From what Barnaby Joyce is saying, he's open to it now. It seems like a deal might be close with the National Party.
Well, I'd never preempt the National Party room. That's always a dangerous thing to do. But I think you'll find there's pragmatic members and senators, all 21 of us, that are looking through the lens of protecting regional Australia, but making sure there's opportunity for regional Australia to also participate in this, whether that be in agriculture sector in particular. I think we need to look at this through the lens of opportunity, not just cost. And that's where I think the National Party members are pragmatic, and they're listening to their constituents.
Well, I mean, if they listen to their constituents, every peak body in agriculture supports it. They see the opportunity you talk about. They don't see the risks that Keith Pitt talks about repeatedly. He said in the reaction to Josh Frydenberg's speech that he's going to be placing more of a focus. He says, I'll be putting the jobs of more than 1 million Australians employed directly and indirectly in the resources sector well in front of demands of foreign countries or the UN. It doesn't sound like he's on board.
Well, just be careful. The NFF does support net zero by 2050, but with many of the caveats that the National Party are talking about, to make sure there is no financial burden, but in fact we can participate in the opportunity to reduce emissions so long as we're financially rewarded for it. So I think it's very easy to run off and say that all the farming peaks are saying they want to commit to net zero blindly. They don't. They've been quite sensible, much of which aligns with National Party policy. with respect to the resource sector, as I said, carbon capture storage, a technology that both the United States and Australia want to continue to undertake. And in fact, a coal-fired power station about 60 kilometres just to the west of me here, my own electorate, is one of the first to take that up. But there's other resource opportunities as well that we'll continue to explore. And so I think we've got to be pragmatic about this and understand how this can be achieved while not making any burden, financial burden, particularly on regional Australia. And we're a smart country. We should back ourselves. We've got the smarts in this country that are best in the world. And if we can do it, we can protect regional Australia, as the Prime Minister has been clear. And I think we have to all acknowledge the Prime Minister's statements from the very start has been that regional Australia will not be disadvantaged by this. And I think he's proven that every step of the way. And that's given comfort to the National Party.
But you've got a challenge with the likes of not just Keith Pitt, but Matt Canavan. He said after the Treasurer's speech, he said global banks that want to control who has a job in Australia should be locked out of our country. Doesn't sound like he's got much wiggle room there.
Well, look, the party room is always works on majority, and there's always diverse views within the party room. That's a good thing. That's this beautiful thing called democracy, and we should encourage it, not discourage it. And the fact that there may be people that at the end have a different view, as I have sometimes in that party room, but have come out and supported what the party has said. The reality is not only financial markets, but also bond markets. We've got to understand this is significant. Around the financing and the growth of Australia, and particularly regional Australia. And we can do that. And if we can get a technology pathways, the Prime Minister has said from the start, he's been very clear about this. And I think we've got ourselves tied up in knots about minutiae when he's clearly gone away, thought through the problem and working through this technology roadmap that'll protect regional Australia. And that's what he said from the start. I take him on his word, and I've got no reason not to.
Let's look at a few other issues now, and the reopening. It looks like it's going to be at a different pace for different states. The Premier in your state of Queensland is indicating that even at 80% double vax, she's not suggesting that the borders will reopen at that point. What's your reaction to that?
Look, all Queenslanders want, I think all Australians want, is hope and certainty. And this thing called National Cabinet that the Prime Minister pulled together because all the Premiers said they wanted national leadership. Well, the Prime Minister provided. He created this thing called National Cabinet. And every couple of weeks he brings them into the room and he sits down and creates a plan, a pathway that while they're in the room, they all sign up and say, yep, we're with you. We're with you all the way, PM. He goes out and makes the announcement, and then he looks behind him left and right. There's no one standing there with him, and they all go off on their own directions. What Australians are getting a real education in at the moment is our federation. I think we've failed to understand what federal and state governments have powers and authorities. Health orders are given by state governments, so they have this power and authority. What the Prime Minister has simply done is try to create leadership through National Cabinet, bringing them together to give that consistency, that certainty and that hope. And that is what
does there need to be reopening
for, particularly in the southern
for Queensland at 80%? Would you like to see the Premier more open?
Well, she's got to tell us why. I mean, why she's picking a number. She walks into a room in National Cabinet, signs up to something, then walks out and says, no, I've changed my mind. I mean, surely if the Prime Minister is giving national leadership in bringing the Premiers and First Ministers together, and then they walk out and they go different directions, the question has to be, why are you changing your mind? And that's all we're asking, is that certainty and hope. And, you know, in Queensland, yes, we haven't experienced the lockdowns that you have in the southern states. But I can tell you, we can't live under the doona forever. At some juncture, we're going to have to come out and live with this thing. And the best way is to put your arm out and get a jab. And we're doing that. We're escalating. Over 75% have got the first dose already. And this is where the Premiers now need to actually be open and transparent. The Prime Minister keeps on trying to bring them together. They keep on screaming for national leadership. He keeps on giving it, and then they turn around and he's got no one with him. This is where federation is being tested, and our Premiers now need to stand up.
We're seeing, as you said there, that vaccine rollout is gathering steam, and yet at this period, 2 years into the pandemic, or nearly 2 years, we're seeing civil unrest erupt as well. The most locked-down city in the world, in Melbourne, seeing that sadly over recent days. What's your reaction to what you've seen out of Melbourne, and do you fear that we'll see more unrest if governments don't articulate plans and stick to them?
Well, that small element are society's scum. And quite frankly, they should be forced into some isolation at Her Majesty's pleasure. Police do not need that. And even innocent bystanders being caught up in that is abhorrent. That is not Australian. Those people do not deserve to live in this society freely. They should be put away in jail, in isolation, to reflect at Her Majesty's pleasure, to make sure that when they are let out, they don't do it again. But the frustration is building. And when you look at the world record that's happening in Melbourne, an unenviable one, the longest lockdown anywhere in the world, you get the frustration, but violence is not the answer. And taking it out on police especially is not the answer. I sympathise with those men and women in blue that surely should not have to go through this. I actually support anyone that wants to protest, but once they step over that line and they start going into violence, they start destroying, monuments to those that have protected our freedoms. Over 100,000 Australians have lost their lives protecting that. They don't deserve to be walking free in society, and the police shouldn't have to put up with that rubbish. This scum should be put away, but premiers, again, simply have to lead. The Prime Minister has given them a pathway to lead. Take it. This is a real test of leadership. The Prime Minister stand up and do it. We just need the premiers now to stand up with him.
Now, finally, David Littleproud, you're, as I mentioned in your introduction, the Agriculture Minister. A big focus for you recently has been the Ag Visa. It's going to start implementation from this Thursday. How are you going to have the Ag Visa, which, as I understand it, runs alongside the Pacific labour arrangements, which have been in place for a number of years? This Ag Visa, how is it going to work in a sort of this COVID period to ensure that those arrive have the appropriate health checks and so on?
Yeah, so just to reiterate, this is complementary and supplementary to our Pacific schemes that are for seasonal workers. These actually goes further than just seasonal workers. It's also skilled and semi-skilled. And those countries that we bring them in will have a pathway to permanent residency if they provide time. So this is the next generation of migrants coming to Australia, coming to regional Australia, growing regional Australia, if they work in agriculture. So effectively, we're simply adding to the number of suite of programs, whether they be domestic programs that giving Australians first crack at these jobs, or the Pacific, and now the Ag Visa, the opportunity for people to come in and work in agriculture. And a suite of measures. We simply need the states to take this up. The quarantining arrangements, as I articulated earlier, the health orders in this country are dictated to by the chief health officers in each of these states. Some states have done an outstanding job. I've got to say South Australia have led the way on this. They've created their own quarantine facility for ag workers, and they're now doing in-country quarantine for Vanuatuans. The territories
how many workers are you looking to bring in under this visa? How many workers are we talking about on a yearly basis?
Well, it's demand-driven, but we're estimating, ABARES is estimating, just in horticulture alone, so not even talking about meat processing or other sectors of forestry or fisheries in agriculture, we estimate nearly 30,000 will be required by February. So this is why we're saying to the states, you need to have confidence and faith in one another. You need to be able to lift the opportunity to bring these people in by bringing them in through safe ways, whether it be on-farm quarantining or your own facilities, in which some states have shown the leadership to be able to do. But again, this is a real education in federation. Okay. Everyone looks to big bad Canberra, they're going to solve everything. But in fact, many of the levers are left with the states.
Deputy Nationals Leader David Littleproud, appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thanks for having me, mate.